The first reports usually arrive without urgency. A missed radio check, a late return time, a truck left parked longer than it should be. Most disappearances in remote parks begin this way, quietly, on a normal workday, without any signal that something has already gone wrong. This case file opens in the northern section of Redwood National and State Parks. The date is May 10th. The year is 2014. Weather log shows low cloud cover, light coastal wind, and steady drizzle along the ridge system east of Bald Hills Road. Routine conditions for spring. Ranger Evan Morales, 36 years old, assigned to trail assessment and maintenance, was scheduled to inspect a 5-mile segment of an old service track used decades earlier for controlled burns. He signed out at 0730. He logged the route. He packed standard gear, compass, map, radio, GPS beacon, first aid kit, 24 hours of rations. Nothing unusual. At 9:02, he radioed dispatch. His report was short. Trail wet, no obstruction, moving north. The transmission was clean, no interference noted. That was the last routine message. At 10:26, dispatch attempted to reach him for the scheduled check. There was no response. The operator repeated the call 4 times, only static. Protocol required a second attempt after 5 minutes. Again, nothing. GPS data stopped updating at 10:28. The coordinates placed him roughly 1 mile from a decommissioned fire road. The location was entered into the incident log. At 1300, a ranger unit was sent to locate him. They reached his parked vehicle at 1440. It was locked. No signs of forced entry. No equipment removed except what he had taken with him in the morning. Keys were found inside on the driver's seat. The door had been secured manually. This detail was logged without interpretation. Search leaders marked a 1-mile radius around the last GPS point. Teams advanced in grid formation. Vegetation was thick with ferns and downed redwood limbs. Visibility in the understory was poor. Radios functioned intermittently. No boot prints were recovered along the expected route. Mud conditions should have preserved at least partial impressions. None were found. At 1620, a volunteer located a single item approximately 300 yards north of the GPS point. It was Morales's map, folded, dry, no tears, no mud. It was resting on a flat section of a moss-covered stump. There were no prints nearby, no broken branches, no signs the area had been searched previously. The item lay as if placed deliberately. The timestamp was entered into the log. The area was flagged and photographed. Light began to fail. Drizzle increased to steady rainfall. Search teams were pulled back at 2000. No further evidence had been found. That evening, investigators reviewed the GPS track. It showed consistent movement until the final point. No deviation, no abrupt course change, no recorded pause. The last logged location did not coincide with any hazard area. No ravines, no exposed cliffs, no water crossings. The track ended in level terrain beneath second-growth redwoods, where the ground was saturated and soft. A missing person should have left visible impressions. Search resumed at first light on May 11th. Dogs were deployed. They caught a weak scent on the western flank of the grid, but lost it within minutes. Handlers attributed the failure to moisture and heavy ground cover. Air support surveyed the canopy openings. Negative results. At 1340, another item was recovered. His radio. It was found in a cleared patch of soil 30 inches across. The radio showed no external damage. Battery still functional. The antenna intact. The device was switched off. Its surface was dry despite the prior night's rainfall. No tracks were present around the object. 2 items placed cleanly. No prints. No soil disturbance. Search leaders extended the perimeter again. By dusk of the second day, there were no further findings. Evan Morales had entered the forest with full gear. Only a map and a radio had come back, both positioned in places where no natural process would have set them. The final note entered that night asked one question. If he had dropped them, why were they clean? If he had placed them, why there? Morning briefings on May 12th repeated the same 3 points. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no indication of voluntary departure. Ranger Morales had simply gone silent in a location where silence should leave marks. The search perimeter was expanded another mile in all directions. Teams switched to tighter grid spacing. Overnight rainfall had eased. Visibility improved. At 0820, a canine team operating on the northeastern edge flagged an area of interest. The dog alerted twice, both times near a downed redwood, diameter nearly 6 feet, fallen decades earlier. Its bark pattern was consistent with a scent source, but the handler could not identify anything visible. No clothing, no gear. Soil around the trunk was undisturbed. The dog circled repeatedly, then stopped responding. Handlers called it an unproductive alert caused by residual odor trapped in old wood. The spot was photographed and marked anyway. At 9:40, a searcher located what should have been a reliable clue: a partial boot print in soft mud along a slope facing north. But the impression was odd. It matched Morales's issued boot tread, but the depth was shallow, as if placed without full weight. The print also pointed uphill at an angle that did not align with any sensible route. A second print nearby angled in the opposite direction, with nearly identical depth. Investigators noted that they looked set, not stepped. The impressions lacked the sidewall distortion expected from real movement. Soil analysis could not confirm or contradict placement. The prints were logged without conclusion. At 1100, the command post received a call from a hiker who had been on a ridge overlooked the previous afternoon. He reported hearing a single male voice carry through the trees. He could not understand the words. The tone, he said, didn't sound like someone calling for help. Rangers interviewed him on site. His description was vague. He believed the sound originated from a valley southeast of Morales's last GPS point. Weather conditions at that time made long-distance sound travel plausible. Teams were reassigned to sweep the indicated area. The southeast valley was steep, layered with fog pockets that drifted between old-growth trunks. At 13:15, a team moving along a drainage found a third item: Morales's compass. It was sitting on a patch of bare soil beneath a redwood root network. As with the map and radio, it was clean. No mud, no debris. The needle functioned normally. The compass lid was latched. Again, there were no tracks or drag marks around it. Investigators began to review the spacing of the items. The map, radio, and compass formed an approximate triangle almost half a mile across. Nothing about Morales's training or habits suggested he would remove and place these items in that pattern. Standard protocol would keep map and compass accessible, radio clipped to the vest. Dropping one might happen in an incident. Dropping 3 in separated precise points was inconsistent with field behavior. Searchers pressed into the lower valley. At 1540, they located a section of forest floor where moss appeared compressed in a linear shape, roughly 6 feet long. The impression had no clear boundary lines and no associated prints or signs of weight transfer. Moss compression suggested something had rested there briefly. A sweep for fibers returned negative. Soil beneath was undisturbed. The shape did not match a person lying down or an equipment case. It was irregular, rounded at one end, tapering at the other. The notation in the incident log reads, "Unknown contact pattern. Cause undetermined." Radio interference increased in the valley. Static bursts interrupted transmissions irregularly. Teams rotated to higher ground to maintain contact. The interference did not correlate with elevation or position. A communications technician tested repeaters and found no fault. The anomaly was marked as environmental. By 1800, no additional evidence was recovered. The valley sweep concluded without visual confirmation of Morales. Air support attempted thermal imaging at dusk, but the dense canopy and residual heat from sun-warmed trunks produced false positives, too numerous to isolate. Back at the command post, investigators compiled the day's findings. 3 clean items, 2 anomalous prints, one sound report with no follow-up, one unidentified ground impression, no progression toward a coherent sequence. The final line of the daily summary states, "Subject movement cannot be modeled with available evidence." May 13th began with revised assumptions. Search leaders no longer treated the disappearance as a simple, lost subject case. The recovery of clean items in separate points suggested either staging or transport inconsistent with natural movement. Nevertheless, the operational plan remained conventional. Expand the grid, verify drainages, check canopy openings, and review any overlooked side trails. Weather at sunrise was stable. Low mist along the mid-slopes, clearing by 8. Temperature mild. Ground still wet from previous days. At 0750, a technical rope team was assigned to a narrow ravine south of the GPS endpoint. The ravine held intermittent water flow and several boulder piles that could conceal a body or gear. Access required careful descent. At 0920, the team reported finding a disturbance in leaf litter on a ledge halfway down. The pattern was circular, roughly 2 feet across. Leaves were compressed but not shifted downslope. No scrape marks on the rock around it. The area was photographed. The report phrased it as non-directional compression. No conclusion drawn. At 10:10, a helicopter crew spotted glare reflecting from something metallic near a high ridge west of the core search area. Ground teams were redirected. At 11:20, they reached the location and identified the reflective source, a standard-issue emergency blanket. It was folded, dry, clean, positioned on a flat stone surface. As with previous items, no sign of exposure to the elements despite 2 days of rain and mist. The blanket showed no punctures or tears. Rangers confirmed Morales had carried one in his pack. That pack, however, still had its sealed pocket intact when his vehicle was inspected. If the blanket belonged to him, it had been removed after he left the vehicle. But no other pack contents had been found anywhere. The ridge area showed no boot impressions. Soil was thin, mostly stone and lichen. Rangers checked crevices for fibers. Negative. The object appeared to have been placed, not dropped. At 12:40, a call came from a family camping near the southern boundary. They reported hearing faint radio chatter the previous evening around 1900. Their description: short clicks, then a few words. Male voice unclear, then silence. They initially assumed it was ranger traffic, but they contacted the station after hearing about the search on a visitor bulletin board. The timing fit within the period when teams had experienced interference. Investigators logged the report. The campers could not identify direction or content. At 13:30, dog teams attempted another sweep near the location of the anomalous boot prints from the prior day. One dog alerted on a narrow game trail leading uphill toward a stand of old-growth redwoods. The alert lasted less than 10 seconds before the dog broke focus and refused to re-engage. Handler notes mentioned the dog showed stress behavior without identifiable trigger. Environmental causes were not ruled out. No odor source was found. At 14:50, a ranger reported finding a single broken branch on a young fir tree roughly 4 feet above ground. The break was clean, as if snapped intentionally. Bark around the break showed no scuffing, suggesting no heavy object pressed against it. Investigators measured height and photographed. No hair, fiber, or tool marks. The detail was logged as inconclusive. At 16:10, the search perimeter was widened again, adding another mile on the western side. Terrain there transitioned from dense undergrowth to more open forest floor. Conditions allowed for better tracking, yet nothing. No prints, droppings, displaced branches, or torn moss suggested recent human presence. At 17:30, the operations chief paused field activity to reassess sequence and spacing of found items. Map, radio, compass, emergency blanket, all positioned at intervals extending outward from the original GPS point in no coherent direction. No straight line, no curve, no logical path of egress. None of the items were weathered. all sat in locations where natural deposition was improbable. Before sunset, teams conducted a final sweep of the ravine. No equipment, no clothing, no body. The day's summary closed with a line that appeared verbatim in the incident record. Recovered objects show no temporal wear relative to environment. Placement pattern unexplained. Subject's last known route unverifiable. May 14th opened with low overcast and light wind moving downslope from the north. Search leadership shifted strategy from broad grid expansion to focused revisits of locations where anomalous findings had clustered. The working assumption was no longer that new evidence lay farther out, but that something within the existing perimeter had been missed or had changed. At 0740, a two-person ranger unit was dispatched to re-examine the stump where the map had been recovered on day 1. The area was undisturbed. Moss compression around the stump matched the initial photographs. No new tracks. No secondary items. Temperature of the stump's exposed surface was measured at 9 degrees Celsius, consistent with ambient. Nothing indicated recent contact. At 0830, a parallel team checked the site of the placed radio. Rainfall had darkened the soil patch, but the object outline was still visible in older photos. A residue test on the surface returned only organic particulates, typical of forest floor detritus. No fingerprints were obtained from the radio during initial processing, and none were expected now. Still, the report reiterated the absence of soil adhesion on the device when found. At 900, a search team moved through a ridgeline corridor northwest of the ravine, prompted by a helicopter observer who thought he saw a change in canopy coloration the previous evening. Ground teams confirmed the area contained several recently shed redwood needles. Shedding was common this time of year. However, one patch, approximately 8 by 12 feet, showed an unusual pattern, a central oval of darker needles bordered by lighter ones, suggesting differential exposure to moisture. The oval measured nearly 6 feet at its longest axis. The ground beneath showed no footprints or drag lines. Investigators logged it as canopy drop anomaly. At 10:20, a radio call from Team C reported short-band interference again. The operator described it as a rapid click pattern, lasting less than a second. No audible voice. The phenomenon occurred twice, then stopped. Weather was stable. The team was not in a known coverage shadow. The interference was recorded on their handset, but analysis later yielded no identifiable signal origin. At 11:10, a new finding broke the pattern. A glove. It was discovered by a volunteer 50 yards east of the drainage, where the compass had been recovered. The glove was Morales' standard-issue right-hand tactical glove. It lay palm up on a bed of ferns. No mud, no moisture, no leaf impressions, as if set down gently. The glove's interior was dry, fabric clean, no tears, no signs of animal contact. Rangers photographed, bagged, and tagged it immediately. Its position, when plotted against the prior item recovery points, created a loose 4-point scatter with irregular spacing, none of which aligned with logical movement routes or contours. The search chief noted that each item found to date was an object normally secured to the exterior or top layer of the pack, except the emergency blanket, which came from an interior pocket. The significance was unclear. At 12:40, the communications technician performed live checks of all on-site radios from the command post. No anomalies detected. But at 1300, when Team D attempted to relay a status update from the lower valley, the transmission broke mid-sentence and reconnected 3 seconds later. The missing interval contained no static, just silence. Team D insisted they had not released the transmit key. The observation was added to the technical log. At 14:30, following a short rest rotation, teams regrouped to conduct a controlled line search through a dense fern field south of the original GPS coordinate. Movement was slow. Visibility near ground level, less than 8 feet. At 15:05, a ranger spotted another ground compression, similar to the moss impression found on the second day, but this time in ferns. Several stalks bent outward, forming a narrow teardrop shape approximately 5 feet long and 2 feet wide. No central footprint, no object, no fallen limb nearby. The bending pattern suggested displacement without downward force. The report phrased it as vegetation deflected radially, no impact origin. At 1650, the operations chief held a field briefing. 7 items recovered. No subject, no coherent track, no evidence of injury, animal predation, or voluntary departure. No weather event capable of obscuring all signs. The word static appeared repeatedly in radio logs despite stable atmospheric conditions. By 1800, the day's search closed. Fog drifted in from the western slopes, limiting end-of-day observations. The Daily Record's last line remained concise. Evidence does not support subject travel by known means. May 15th began with a shift in operational posture. The formal designation of the incident changed from lost subject, high probability recovery, to missing subject, evidence anomalous. The modification carried no practical change in field activity, but reflected the widening gap between inputs and outcomes. Standard models failed to align with the collected data. Weather log: overcast, breaking into thin sun at mid-morning. Ground moisture moderate. Winds low. At 0750, a drone team was assigned to survey a 2-mile arc west of the core area. Earlier attempts had been limited by canopy density, but improved lighting conditions allowed for oblique angle imaging. The drone grid took 90 minutes. Thermal filters showed no signatures consistent with a person. However, at 0942, a still image revealed a geometric pattern on the forest floor, an arrangement of lighter and darker vegetation forming a broad semicircle approximately 20 feet across. Ground teams were dispatched. At 10:15, the teams reached the location. The pattern was visible but subtle. Ferns along the outer curve were slightly compressed, but not trampled. The inner area contained scattered redwood needles of uniform dryness and coloration, inconsistent with surrounding moisture. Investigators concluded the needles had fallen earlier than those nearby. The curvature was smooth, without gaps. No tracks, no items, no natural explanation recorded. At 10:50, a ranger on the eastern flank reported hearing a short, low-frequency vibration through the ground. Not a sound, but a sensation. The vibration lasted less than 2 seconds. Soil subsurface checks indicated no seismic activity. No heavy equipment operated within miles. The ranger insisted the sensation felt directional, as if something shifted weight, but no correlate was found. The entry was logged as unconfirmed ground resonance. At 11:20, a separate find redirected resources: Morales's left boot. It stood upright on a patch of bare ground near a rotted log. The laces were tied. The boot was dry. No soil packed in the tread. No scuffs. No sign it had been removed by force. It appeared placed with care. Rangers noted that the boot's position, heel precisely aligned with a natural crack in the earth, seemed deliberate. No second boot was nearby. No sock. No prints. This was the first item of clothing recovered aside from the glove. The escalation was significant. Removing a boot under normal circumstances would require time, sitting, and physical effort. No indication of such activity existed at the site. The vegetation around the placement area was intact. At noon, a briefing at the command post re-evaluated item spacing: map, radio, compass, emergency blanket, glove, boot. The distances varied widely, but each item had been placed in an environment that should have marked human presence clearly. Yet none showed transitional evidence. Search leaders discussed whether items were being moved between search cycles, but overnight, surveillance had been limited by resources and terrain. At 12:45, the communications technician tested repeaters again. No faults. Yet at 1300, a transmission from Team B returned with a distortion. A brief echo of the operator's own voice, delayed by nearly half a second. This type of artifact did not match any known interference pattern in the region. It happened once and did not repeat. The recording was archived. At 1410, another discovery was logged. A rectangular area of forest floor, approximately 3 by 4 feet, showed an absence of debris. No needles, no leaves, no twigs, just clean bare soil. Edges were straight but not cut, as if something had rested there and been removed prior to the team's arrival. The impression depth, negligible, no tracks leading to or from it. Rangers attempted to determine if an equipment case could have made such an outline, but dimensions did not match common field gear. At 1550, K9 teams attempted another pass near the recovered boot. 2 dogs refused to enter a 20-foot circle around the placement site. Both sat down, facing away from it. Handlers recorded the behavior as avoidance, cause unknown. Wind direction was neutral. No chemical traces detected. At 1630, overcast returned, reducing light beneath the canopy. Teams pulled back to core radius per dusk protocol. The daily summary contained a new phrasing not present earlier in the incident. Recovered items indicate removal of gear inconsistent with environmental processes or subject incapacity. No mechanism identified. The last notation by the operations chief read simply, "Subject presence unverified. Activity pattern persists. May 16th opened under stable skies. Light fog clung to lower drainages but burned off quickly. Overnight temperatures remained mild. Conditions should have favored track retention, yet the search teams continued to report negative ground signs across all sectors. The absence of transitional evidence, prints, drag patterns, broken foliage, was now considered a defining feature of the incident. At 0730, the operations chief reinstated a close-interval grid sweep through the central quadrant, focusing on areas where item placement density was highest. Teams were instructed to document even marginal anomalies. At 0810, the first such anomaly appeared. A shallow depression in a cluster of sword ferns, roughly 4 feet long and 18 inches wide. Unlike prior vegetation bends, this depression had a uniform concavity, as though weight had pressed downward evenly without a body's asymmetry. No central imprint, no heel-toe pattern. Soil underneath was dry in the top quarter-inch, despite morning moisture elsewhere. Rangers logged it as surface compression, origin undetermined. At 900, drone teams conducted a second-day pass over the western corridor. While no thermal signatures were found, one sequence of images captured subtle linear alignments in understory gaps. 4 parallel lines, each approximately 6 feet apart, spanning nearly 40 feet. On the ground, these lines corresponded to areas of slightly shorter vegetation, uniformly trimmed at the top edges. Not cut, not torn, simply shorter, as if exposed to selective wear. The vegetation around them remained full height. Rangers were unable to identify a natural or mechanical cause. At 9:45, a significant find occurred. Morales' second boot. It stood upright, like the first. Same condition. Dry, clean, laces tied, tread free of soil. The placement site was nearly 3/4 of a mile from where the first boot had been found, separated by uneven terrain. The boot faced north-northwest. Investigators measured precise orientation, questioning whether directionality might be intentional. No sock, footprint, or debris accompanied it. Again, the vegetation around it showed no disturbance. At 10:20, a ranger positioned near the southern perimeter reported hearing what he described as a single step, a compact, heavy sound, not far upslope. He anticipated seeing someone coming through the brush, but no movement followed. No second step, no rustling. When the team checked the area, they found no tracks and no loose stones that could have shifted on their own. The ranger remained certain the sound had mass behind it. The notation: isolated impact noise, no visual confirmation. At 1100, a technical specialist reviewed GPS track segments from the initial disappearance once more. A detail previously overlooked was noted. The final coordinate showed a slight lateral drift consistent with the receiver being moved horizontally while suspended, not while walking. The drift lasted less than 3 seconds before the signal ceased entirely. Investigators could not determine if the anomaly resulted from signal bounce or physical movement. It was logged for further analysis. At 11:30, a new object was found: Morales's field notebook. It rested against the base of a redwood, open to a middle page. The paper was dry except for faint moisture at the outer edge, likely from ambient humidity. The handwriting on the visible page matched previous entries: mileage estimates, trail notes, weather observations. Nothing alarming. The last written line, time-stamped 09:15 on the day he disappeared, ended mid-sentence. Visibility holding steady along. No subsequent writing appeared anywhere in the notebook. No smudges. No tearing. The notebook's exterior was inexplicably clean. At 12:50, a ranger from Team F flagged an area of interest: a cluster of stones arranged in a rough arc. 5 stones, each fist-sized, spaced evenly across a small clearing. Moss on the underside of each stone indicated they had been lifted recently. No soil traces appeared on their upper surfaces. For procedural completeness, the configuration was photographed from multiple angles. No one on the team recognized the stones as belonging to any natural pattern. At 1400, atmospheric conditions shifted. A localized static distortion passed through 2 active radio channels simultaneously. Operators described it as a rising hiss, then a hard drop to silence. Duration: less than 1 second. Both radios recorded the same event at the same timestamp. Importantly, teams were positioned nearly a mile apart at the time. At 1540, K9 teams attempted a sweep north of the notebook site. Both dogs displayed avoidance behavior again, refusing to advance down a shallow slope. Their posture indicated confusion rather than fear. The handlers noted a mild vibrating sensation in the handheld receivers when approaching the area, though equipment checks found no faults. At 1700, daylight weakened faster than expected as cloud cover re-established. Teams withdrew to the command post. The summary for the day included a new operational note. Item dispersion now includes clothing, navigation tools, and written materials. No pattern correlates with subject behavior or environmental vectors. Evidence continues to appear absent arrival trace. The final comment entered by the operations chief read, "Sequence suggests ongoing placement rather than recovery." May 17th began with an internal briefing that differed sharply from earlier days. Instead of route planning and sector division, the first 30 minutes were devoted to reviewing the timeline of item recoveries. The pattern now spanned 6 days. Items appeared at irregular intervals, consistently clean, consistently without tracks, consistently beyond what a missing subject, injured or otherwise, could plausibly produce. No one stated the implication openly, but the shift in tone was recorded in the log as operational uncertainty increasing. Weather clear, ground moisture receding, winds light. At 0740, the first team out, Team A, was directed to revisit a shallow ridge north of the notebook site. The area had yielded no evidence previously, but drone footage from the prior afternoon suggested slight canopy thinning. On arrival, the team found no canopy break, but did note a narrow band of trees with unusual bark scoring. The scoring ran horizontally, thin parallel lines spaced evenly about an inch apart. Tool marks were considered, but no metal residue or splintering appeared. The marks were shallow, uniform, and extended across 6 trees in a straight line. The ranger who logged the finding wrote, "Patterned, not incidental." At 8:30, another discovery came in: Morales's headlamp. It was found hanging from a low branch of a tannic tree, strap neatly looped once around the limb. The lamp surface was dry, free of debris, and the battery indicator showed full charge. The team confirmed Morales had taken a headlamp from the equipment cache on the morning of his disappearance. Its placement, elevated, visible at a distance, contrasted with the ground-level positioning of earlier items. Again, no prints or broken vegetation surrounded the site. At 9:10, Team D reported an auditory anomaly. a short clipped burst resembling a distant shout, but tonally flat, lacking human contour. It occurred once, direction indeterminate. 3 searchers heard it simultaneously. Later comparison of bodycam audio captured a faint, low-frequency pulse at the same timestamp. Spectrogram analysis identified no recognizable structure. The entry remained unresolved. At 1000, a new pattern emerged. A ranger discovered 3 narrow, straight impressions in soft earth, each about a foot long, running parallel at a spacing of roughly 3 inches. The impressions were shallow, no more than a 1/4 inch deep, and lacked entry or exit points. They began and ended abruptly. Soil consistency indicated the impressions were recent, within the last 12 hours. Investigators could not match them to any known tool, boot, tripod, or wildlife marking. At 10:40, the operations chief received a report from the night surveillance team. A thermal camera positioned on the western boundary had detected a brief temperature dip, localized, circular, and lasting less than a second, at 0320. The temperature dropped by roughly 3 degrees Celsius in a radius of about 2 feet. No movement, no shape, no subsequent readings. Environmental factors were ruled unlikely due to the isolated nature of the fluctuation. The camera's hardware tested normal. At 11:15, the incident took another step into unexplained territory. Morales' jacket was recovered. It was found neatly folded on a large flat stone beside a dry stream bed. The fabric was clean, dry, and free of tearing or stretching. The pockets were empty. Rangers confirmed the jacket matched Morales' issued layer. No sign of the subject appeared nearby. The folding was precise, edges aligned, sleeves tucked. No one could explain how a jacket removed in the field, under stress or fatigue, could be recovered in such condition. At 12:10, during a midday regroup, a ranger reported a personal observation. While walking through Sector G, he felt a momentary pressure imbalance, ears popping as if descending rapidly in altitude. The sensation lasted half a second. No others reported it. Barometric sensors showed no fluctuation. The incident log added a new category: localized atmospheric variance. At 13:30, a multi-team sweep of the central corridor began. Within minutes, Team C radioed in with another find. This time, not an item, but a marked absence. A perfect circular patch of ground, about 6 feet in diameter, completely cleared of detritus. No twigs, no needles, no leaves, down to bare mineral soil. The edge of the circle was clean, almost mechanically defined. The interior surface bore no prints, scuffs, or disturbances. Rangers considered whether wind vortex activity could be responsible, but tree spacing and canopy density made the explanation unlikely. At 14:50, canine handlers attempted another pass near the newly cleaned circle. Both dogs displayed identical behavior. They approached within 10 feet, stopped abruptly, and sat. Their body posture was not avoidance this time. It was stillness, focused, ears forward, then gradually turning their heads away from the circle without being prompted. When encouraged to proceed, both dogs whined and refused. Handlers pulled them back. At 15:20, a final find for the day was logged: Morales' multi-tool. It lay on a small mound of earth, open, clean, unfolded to the pliers position. No soil on the grips, no rust. The tool had been in his right side belt pouch on departure. The pouch itself was still missing. At 1700, field operations suspended. Clouds were thickening from the west, and light dropped early. The daily summary concluded. Recovered gear now includes wearable layers and essential tools. Placement pattern inconsistent with subject survival scenario. Evidence suggests sequential deposition rather than abandonment or loss. The last internal note from the operations chief read, "If items continue to appear, rate may increase. No predictive model available." May 18th opened under low, uniform cloud cover with mist collecting along the mid-slopes. Visibility was moderate. Ground moisture had increased overnight, which should have improved print retention. Search leaders emphasized this point in the morning briefing. If new items appeared today, as they had for 6 consecutive days, there should finally be transitional evidence around them. That expectation didn't hold. At 0740, the first team moved into Sector C, where the jacket and multi-tool had been found the previous day. Within 20 minutes, a ranger noted a faint but persistent tone in his radio headset. High frequency, continuous, not sourced from any channel. The tone stopped when he removed the headset, but resumed the moment the radio powered on. The device tested as fully functional. When another ranger swapped headsets with him, the tone continued for the first ranger only. The incident log records: operator-specific interference, no equipment fault. At 0820, a small but significant discovery occurred. Morales' left sock. It lay stretched flat on a patch of damp moss. The sock was dry, clean, no compression in the surrounding vegetation, no debris fused to fabric. Investigators noted that the sock's toe seam aligned precisely with a natural ridge in the moss bed, consistent with deliberate positioning. They also noted that the sock could not plausibly have been removed after the boots had already been found tied and upright. The sequence contradicted human dressing behavior. At 900, Team F sweeping upslope of the sock location encountered a pattern in the soil. 3 concentric arcs of darker earth, shallow but uniform, forming a partial ring roughly 8 feet across. Soil composition tests showed no moisture difference between arc and non-arc regions. The coloration came from displacement, not saturation. There were no prints within or around the arcs. The arcs began and ended abruptly, suggesting they were not formed by rotation or dragging of an object. At 950, a ranger positioned near the western boundary reported movement, specifically the sound of something passing through dense brush. He described it as heavy displacement without footfall pattern. The brush parted visibly at one point, but snapped back too quickly for identification. When the team advanced, they found no tracks, no broken stems, and no animal sign. The description was logged as visual vegetation displacement, no source. At 1020, another object appeared, Morales' duty belt. It lay coiled neatly on top of a low stump. The belt's nylon was dry, unfrayed, and its buckle bore no scratches. Attached accessories were missing: radio holster, multi-tool pouch, field knife sheath. The belt's contour suggested it had been removed intentionally and arranged symmetrically. Rangers photographing the scene noted a faint odor of metal, not blood or decay, but something like cold steel. The scent dissipated within minutes. At 1100, drone passes over the northern quadrant detected no heat signatures, but did capture something else: a brief shadow-like form, crossing a clearing, visible only across 2 frames. The form had no recognizable outline, no body, no limb, no definable shape, only a distortion in reflected light. When processed, the image showed a slight drop in luminance localized to a tapering smear less than a meter long. The log entry remained cautious. Optical disturbance. Probable artifact. At 1140, a ranger from Team B reported experiencing a sudden onset of nausea and vertigo. Symptoms lasted less than 15 seconds, then ceased completely. Barometric pressure was stable. The ranger had no medical history indicating susceptibility. 2 other members of the team noted a metallic taste in their mouths at the same moment. None could identify a cause. The event timestamp correlated precisely with a brief signal dropout in the command post's telemetry feed. At 1220, another sock, the right one, was found. This one hung neatly over a thin branch at shoulder height. Dry, clean, no sagging, no snagged fibers. The placement suggested careful draping. Rangers documented the lack of any ladder marks, broken twigs, or footprints that would indicate someone had climbed or stood on anything to hang it. The sock's orientation, heel inward, toe outward, matched the left sock's orientation on the moss ridge earlier that morning. The consistency was noted, At 1300, a sustained sweep of the central drainage recorded a new auditory anomaly, a low mechanical hum lasting 4 seconds. 15 personnel across 3 teams heard it. None could determine direction. Sound meters captured a narrow-band frequency spike centered around 96 Hz. No equipment in the incident area operated at that range. After 4 seconds, the sound ceased cleanly, with no fade. At 1420, the most troubling find of the day occurred. Morales's base layer shirt, torn in a straight vertical line down the center, but otherwise clean and free of soil. The tear showed no fraying, a single smooth split, as if cut by pressure rather than a blade. The shirt lay folded once over a fallen limb. Investigators could not reconcile the tear pattern with any known natural or mechanical cause present in the field. At 1550, K9 teams attempted a controlled approach toward the drainage where the shirt had been found. Both dogs halted before entering and refused commands to move forward. One emitted a low growl, not directed at any visible target, but at the ground itself. Handlers withdrew them after 30 seconds. At 1630, cloud cover thickened and wind shifted sharply west. Teams were ordered to withdraw. The daily summary ended with, recovered items indicate near full removal of subject's clothing and equipment. No biological evidence recovered. No footprints or transitional signs. Placement remains temporally inconsistent with search cycles. The final internal note from the operations chief read, "We are now recovering a sequence of absence, not presence." May 19th began with an unspoken expectation. Another item would appear. For 8 consecutive days, the pattern had held. Objects from Morales's person emerging at irregular intervals, each impossibly clean, each without transitional evidence. The search teams no longer asked if something new would be found, only where and how far it would deviate from normal field logic. Weather remained steady. High fog, mild wind, soil moisture rising subtly from nighttime condensation. At 0750, Team A began a focused sweep through Sector H, an area not yet associated with prior recoveries. At 8:02, only 12 minutes in, the first anomaly surfaced. A narrow vertical groove in the trunk of a small redwood sapling. The groove ran 40 inches upward, perfectly straight, depth uniform, width no more than half a centimeter. No bark chipping, no debris at the base. The mark was too clean for an animal claw and too narrow for a blade. Rangers noted the absence of directional force indicators. No feathering, no compression. Linear displacement without incision, the field note read. At 8:25, a second groove was found on another sapling 15 feet downslope. Same length, same width, same orientation, as if parallel, but offset. This pair formed a line pointing directly toward a low depression between 2 ridges. Teams were redirected. At 8:50, a new item was located, Morales's field knife sheath. It lay centered in the depression, empty, perfectly dry. No knife, no mud traces inside the sheath, no wear along the edges. The snap closure was undone, though rangers could not determine when. The sheath had been on Morales's belt on departure. The belt itself had been recovered the previous day. The missing attachments were appearing separately. The depression surrounding the sheath showed no compression, no tracks, and no indication of wildlife disturbance. At 9:30, a ranger on overwatch reported visual movement deep within understory brush, something passing quickly upslope, low to the ground, yet not using any quadrupedal gait. The ranger described it only as a shape interrupting the uniformity of brush motion. By the time the team advanced, the vegetation was still. No tracks existed. The incident record classified the observation as non-confirmable visual deviation. At 10:00, drone operators captured something unusual. While scanning the western slope of the North Ridge, one drone recorded a flash of reflected light, followed by a darkened streak along the ground. Review of the frame-by-frame footage showed a thin, elongated distortion, similar to the optical smear captured days earlier, moving horizontally across a clearing. The movement spanned less than half a second. No object was visible before or after. Technicians again labeled the phenomenon optical disturbance, though multiple occurrences now challenged the artifact assumption. At 10:45, Team D encountered an area of sudden silence. Bird activity, previously steady, ceased all at once. Even insect noise dropped. The team paused, checked radios, and scanned for wildlife. Nothing moved. The air felt heavier, according to one ranger. The silence lasted nearly 40 seconds before ambient sound resumed in a staggered pattern. Distant insects first, then birds, then the usual forest noise. Rangers could not identify what triggered the lapse. At 11:30, another object appeared. Morales' undershirt. It hung from a thin branch, as if draped after laundering. Fabric clean, faint scent of detergent detectable, which contradicted 8 days of outdoor exposure. The undershirt showed no tears, no stretching, no sweat staining. Wind was minimal, yet the shirt did not sway. The branch supporting it carried no bark scuffs. The placement height, just above forehead level, could not be reached without either climbing or stepping on a stable surface, yet surrounding soil was pristine. At 12:20, a ranger examining the branch noticed a secondary anomaly. The air temperature directly beneath the shirt measured 3 degrees Celsius cooler than ambient. The temperature gradient dissipated after 3 minutes. No equipment malfunction was found in the thermometer. At 1300, Team G, positioned near the southern line, encountered a horizontal series of bent ferns, not broken, not crushed, bent uniformly at 15 degrees, forming a straight segment nearly 12 feet long. This was the third such vegetation deformation pattern in the incident, and the longest. The uniformity suggested a singular force moving consistently across the length, but without weight distribution, typical of feet or body mass. Teams hypothesized wind, but surrounding ferns showed no similar displacement. At 1350, a new audio anomaly occurred. 5 rangers spread across 2 teams heard a brief, synchronized clicking sequence. 4 rapid clicks, then silence. Radios were powered on, but inactive. The clicks did not originate from equipment. Bodycam audio captured the sequence, though spectral analysis revealed no known mechanical signature. The clicks were too uniform for wildlife. At 14:30, the most consequential discovery of the day occurred. Morales' backpack. It sat upright at the base of a cedar, hip belt buckled, shoulder straps neatly folded as if prepared for storage. Every external pocket was empty. The main compartment held nothing but air. No rations, no first aid kit, no extra layers, no personal items. The interior was spotless, devoid even of pine needles. The pack's bottom was dry, despite resting on damp ground. Only refusal. At 1600, a ranger reported a new sensory anomaly. A brief metallic ringing, like a struck object, despite no contact and no visible source. The sound lasted less than a second. Another ranger heard nothing. The discrepancy was logged. Teams withdrew at 1700 under thickening fog. The daily summary noted, item progression suggests near-complete removal of subjects' carried equipment. Larger items now appearing with same absence of transitional indicators. Spatial distribution expands inconsistently beyond predicted search cycles. The operations chief added a final line. Subject recovery unlikely. Item emergence continues. May 20th began under a sky of low, fast-moving clouds. Dawn light filtered through in brief, cold intervals. The search teams were quieter than usual during staging. By now, everyone knew the rhythm. Sometime during the day, an item would appear. It was no longer viewed as recovery. It was an event. At 0740, Team C moved into the northwest corridor, an area with intermittent drone anomalies but no direct item findings. 8 minutes in, a ranger reported a distinct smell, ozone, sharp and metallic, localized to a single clearing. The odor dissipated within 30 seconds. No electrical equipment was present. No storm activity. Soil moisture readings were normal. The log marked it as transient atmospheric anomaly. At 08:15, the first discovery of the day emerged: Morales' thermal layer. It was found stretched across 2 low branches as if air drying. Fabric dry, seams intact, no signs of tearing, no dirt, no moisture beading. The shirt's alignment was unnaturally symmetrical, sleeves extended horizontally at equal angles, hem straight. Teams examined surrounding vegetation. No bark scrapes or broken twigs indicated how it was placed. Again, no tracks in the soil. Air temperature directly beneath the garment was measured at 2 degrees Celsius, cooler than ambient, consistent with the previous day's undershirt anomaly. At 900, a ranger stationed 50 yards downslope reported a pressure shift, ears popping, slight shortness of breath, lasting less than a second. Another ranger 6 feet away experienced nothing. Barometers showed stable pressure. The discrepancy was logged under localized environmental inconsistency. At 9:35, drone operators scanning the western ridge recorded a flicker of heat, small, circular, rising briefly above background temperature, then vanishing. It was too brief for classification. The image sequence showed no wildlife, no object, no reflective source. The event was tagged thermal transient. At 10, Team B encountered something new: a field of redwood needles arranged into a near-perfect geometric pattern, 2 concentric rings with a single straight line connecting them. The rings were incomplete but smooth, each segment composed of carefully distributed debris. The needles were older and drier than the surrounding forest litter, as if gathered from different locations. Investigators concluded the pattern was deliberate. No natural mechanism fit the configuration. At 10:50, a new item appeared: Morales' base layer leggings, folded lengthwise, clean, free of debris, placed on a stone with no surrounding disturbance. The fabric appeared unworn, as if laundered. Rangers questioned whether the item had ever been exposed to field use. The stone beneath was dry, despite morning condensation elsewhere. No prints, no drag marks. At 11:20, a sensory anomaly occurred near the item site. 3 rangers simultaneously reported feeling a vibration through the ground, low frequency, steady for 2 seconds. At the same moment, command telemetry registered a half-second data dropout. Equipment diagnostics afterward showed no system fault. At noon, during a routine perimeter sweep, a ranger spotted motion in his peripheral vision, something crossing between 2 redwoods at a height of roughly 4 feet above the ground. He described it as a distortion, like heat shimmer, but without rising motion. The shape lasted less than half a second. The ranger did not classify it as human or animal. The log listed it as visual disturbance. At 12:45, Team D found a new clearing pattern: 3 narrow parallel depressions in the soil, each about 2 feet long. Depth, uniform. Start and end points, abrupt. Soil, perfectly dry despite surrounding moisture. The spacing did not match footprints, dragging equipment, or known wildlife spoor. Investigators noted the impressions were aligned precisely with magnetic north, a detail added to the log without interpretation. At 13:30, a new object appeared: Morales' watch. It rested atop a fern frond, balanced perfectly. Digital display blank. No damage, no scratches, no condensation under the screen. Rangers confirmed battery should have lasted weeks, not days. The watch was one of the few items Morales had worn directly on his body. Its condition, immaculate, was at odds with 8 days of absence. At 1400, a disturbing development occurred. A faint voice was recorded on one ranger's body cam, though he did not hear it live. The audio captured a single syllable, indistinct, soft, tonal, not a word, no directionality. Spectral analysis found no electronic interference. The voice did not match Morales's. It also did not match any ranger on site. The event was classified non-attributable vocal anomaly. At 15:20, during a coordinated sweep, an area of forest floor 30 feet across suddenly shifted from scattered debris to complete stillness. No leaf flutter, no branch sway, despite active wind in surrounding areas. For 45 seconds, the interior of the circle remained perfectly motionless. Then the wind resumed normally. Teams documented the boundary, but no visible marker separated stillness from movement. At 16:10, the final item of the day was discovered: Morales' gaiters. They were laid parallel on a log, left on left, right on right, edges aligned. The straps were buckled. Clean. No sign of moisture despite resting on damp bark. The orientation of the gaiters corresponded precisely to the cardinal directions, buckles facing east. Rangers photographed the orientation from multiple angles. No explanation was proposed. Teams withdrew at 1700 under thickening wind. The daily summary read, recovered items now include full lower body layering and peripheral equipment. Spatial distribution shows increasing geometric precision. Environmental anomalies cluster temporally with item emergence. The operations chief added a single line. Whatever is placing these objects understands sequence, but not movement. May 21st began with heavier overcast than the previous days. A fine mist drifted through the canopy, but did not accumulate on the ground. For the first time since the incident began, several rangers voiced concern, not about the missing subject, but about the nature of the incident itself. The operations chief acknowledged the concern, but reiterated protocol: evidence first, interpretation later. At 07:30, Team F entered Sector K to continue a sweep begun late the previous afternoon. At 07:52, the first anomaly of the day occurred. A radio call from Team F arrived with a half-second delay, followed by the same message again, perfectly duplicated. No ranger on the team had double-keyed. The dispatcher confirmed only one transmission had been sent. The recorded echo was a near-exact copy, including background noise. The event was tagged Signal Duplication Anomaly. At 8:10, the day's first object surfaced: Morales' belt-mounted first aid pouch. It sat on a patch of bare soil, centered, flap open, empty, clean. The Velcro surface showed no fibers. The pouch edges were sharp and unworn, as if unused. Soil beneath it was dry despite being surrounded by damp earth. The placement location had been searched the previous afternoon without result. No tracks had been left. Rangers noted the absence of prints even from themselves. Soil in the immediate area seemed to retain no impressions. At 8:45, Team C reported another discovery along a ridge. A cluster of stones arranged into a perfect triangle, each stone identical in size and spaced equidistantly. When the stones were lifted, the ground beneath was dry. The surrounding soil was damp. No explanation was proposed. The stones themselves bore no markings. At 9:20, a ranger moving upslope saw a faint vertical ripple of distortion 20 feet ahead, like a sheet of heat shimmer standing upright. The distortion held for less than a second. Another ranger 3 feet behind saw nothing. Vegetation showed no reaction. The incident was logged with the phrase, vertical refractive anomaly. At 1000, drone operators detected a static bloom, an expanding white noise pattern interfering with the camera feed for 3 frames. When the feed cleared, the drone was still in stable flight, all systems normal. On ground inspection of the area beneath the interference, teams found a circular zone 4 feet across where forest debris had been cleared down to mineral soil. The circle was nearly identical in size to the one found 2 days earlier. The edges were clean. No prints. No sign of water movement or animal activity. At 10:45, a ranger experienced a sudden reduction in ambient sound, similar to earlier incident patterns. But this time, only one ranger perceived the silence. Others nearby reported normal sound levels. The ranger's body cam audio captured nothing unusual. The log described it as subjective sound suppression. At 11:10, another item emerged: Morales' spare batteries. They were lined up in a straight row on a fallen limb, 4 units, evenly spaced, perfectly parallel. Each battery was clean, with no corrosion or dirt. Rangers confirmed these were taken from the supply locker on the morning of his departure. A quick test showed all 4 at full charge, despite 8 days without use. No natural process could arrange them in such alignment. Again, no prints. At 11:50, Team A reported a ground tremor, a small localized vibration that shook a cluster of ferns, but not the surrounding soil. Only one patch of vegetation moved. The tremor lasted less than a second. Seismic logs recorded nothing. At 12:20, the most unusual discovery so far appeared: Morales' shirt name patch. It was found adhered to the trunk of a redwood at shoulder height, as though pressed onto the bark. The adhesive backing was intact and fresh. Rangers had no explanation for how the patch had remained undamaged. The patch's edges were perfectly aligned to compass east. When removed, it left no residue on the bark. Investigators speculated whether it had been placed minutes before discovery, but no personnel were near the area before the find. At 1300, a brief visual anomaly occurred. A passing shadow moved across the ground without any overhead source. No clouds moved at that moment. The shadow was elongated, featureless, and fast, lasting less than half a second. 3 rangers witnessed it. At 1340, an acoustic event took place. A single low-frequency tone resonated through the forest, audible up to 200 yards away. It lasted exactly 1 second. Rangers described it as not mechanical, not organic, not environmental. A uniform hum that seemed to have no origin point. Audio capture devices recorded a smooth sine wave with no harmonics. The tone did not correspond to any equipment in operation. At 14:10, another item was found: Morales' long-sleeve outer layer, folded once, placed against the base of a cedar. Clean, dry, no debris, no scent. The cedar needles immediately around it were dry as well, unlike others in the vicinity. The placement site had been logged as empty 24 hours earlier. At 1500, Team D documented a new pattern: 5 small depressions in the soil arranged in a star-like shape, depth identical, distance between each depression uniform to within a centimeter. Soil in each depression was dry at the base and damp on the rim, suggesting placement of something that absorbed moisture before being removed. No material traces remained. At 1600, teams began withdrawing under increasing wind. Mist thickened near the ridges. Visibility dropped to 60 feet. The daily summary concluded: item dispersion now includes micro-equipment and uniform elements. Environmental and sensory anomalies increasing in frequency. Evidence indicates non-random, non-natural placement with no transitional mechanism. The operations chief's final line: subject absence approaching total. Pattern shows intent but no identifiable agent. May 22nd began with light rain tapering off before sunrise. Low fog pooled between the mid-slopes, but visibility remained workable. The forest felt colder. Rangers attributed this to moisture and fatigue, though several noted an unnerving stillness before departure. Birds late to start, the usual morning chorus muted. At 0740, Team B entered Sector L, a region where almost no evidence had been found until now. 10 minutes in, they encountered a faint, repeating vibration in the ground. 3 pulses, evenly spaced, each lasting less than a second. Only 2 of the 5 team members felt it. No vegetation reacted. No seismic activity was detected. The entry was logged as localized, non-seismic ground pulses. At 8:05, the day's first object appeared: Morales' laminated ID card. It hung perfectly centered on a broken twig at eye level. The lamination was intact, corners sharp, no scratches. The card's surface was dry despite residual moisture on surrounding foliage. Rangers photographed both sides. The plastic showed no fogging, no exposure wear. The twig onto which it was placed showed no bending or pressure marks. No footprints existed in the 40-foot radius around it. At 8:30, a ranger sweeping a narrow drainage spotted something that initially looked like a fallen branch but moved too deliberately. He described it as a low shifting shadow, existing for less than a second before vanishing behind a tree trunk. No corresponding wildlife sign was found. The incident log categorized this as transient silhouette anomaly. At 900, drone operators scanning the eastern ridge caught a new pattern. A dispersed ring of ferns flattened at their tips. No stems broken, no compression at the base. The ring measured nearly 12 feet across. From above, it resembled a faint halo. When ground teams reached it, the depression in the fern tips was uniform, as if pressed by a broad, weightless surface. No item was present at the center. At 9:35, a new object was found. Morales' GPS beacon. It sat upright on a small rise in the forest floor, powered off, battery fully charged, the casing unscuffed. Rangers confirmed it had been active the morning he left. Its internal logs contained no new data since the moment the original track ended, days earlier. Soil beneath the device was dry, as if shielded from overnight moisture. No tracks led to or from the placement site. At 10:20, a ranger reported a sudden drop in temperature localized to a small clearing. His thermometer showed a 4 degrees Celsius decrease compared to ambient. Another ranger 5 feet away registered no change. The cold zone lasted under 1 minute before readings normalized. No airflow or shade explanation was found. At 10:50, Team D encountered an acoustic event, a soft, irregular tapping sound, like knuckles on wood, occurring at 5-second intervals. The sound was directionless. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It persisted for 23 seconds. Recorded audio showed no clear waveform pattern, only faint mid-frequency impulses. No trees in the area exhibited motion corresponding to the taps. At 11:20, the day's most significant discovery surfaced: Morales' duty shirt. It was draped over a log, sleeves extended outward, chest facing up. Clean, dry. No blood, no tears. The fabric smelled faintly of pine, as if it had been stored indoors, not used outdoors for a week. The name patch area on the chest was empty, consistent with the separate recovery of the patch the previous day. Rangers noted that the shirt showed no signs of time or weather exposure since disappearance. Soil around the log, once again, was undisturbed. At noon, a ranger stationed several hundred yards away from the shirt site reported hearing a low whisper. No words, no language, just a single exhale-like breath. He turned expecting a teammate to be behind him. No one was within 70 feet. Bodycam audio picked up nothing, though a slight pressure fluctuation was seen on the mic input at the moment he described the sound. At 12:45, a geometric ground feature appeared that differed from previous ones. 4 straight lines forming an incomplete square, each line exactly 1 meter long. The lines consisted of cleared debris, as if someone had brushed the forest floor with a wide, flat tool. The lines had uniform width, depth negligible. The incomplete corner pointed toward a narrow cut in the ridge. No item lay within, but the direction was noted. At 13:10, another object appeared. Morales' emergency whistle, placed atop a flat stone, perfectly aligned with the stone's longest axis. Dry, clean, no saliva traces, no scratches. Rangers confirmed the whistle had been on his right shoulder strap. As always, soil around the stone showed no sign of recent passage. At 1400, a faint oscillation in ambient air pressure passed through Sector J. 3 rangers felt their chest compress slightly, as if descending in an aircraft. The sensation lasted 1 second. Instruments captured no atmospheric change. No known environmental phenomenon would affect only human physiology without affecting equipment. At 14:30, the forest went silent again. Sudden, total, complete. Bird calls ceased. Wind movement stopped. Even distant ambient noise dropped. The silence lasted 78 seconds. When it ended, Sound returned unevenly. Insects, then birds, then wind. The event's duration was the longest yet. At 15:15, the final item was recovered: Morales' duty hat. It sat upright in the center of a small moss clearing. The brim was perfectly level, the fabric crisp, the interior band dry and free of sweat. No signs of outdoor exposure. Moss immediately surrounding the hat was damp. Directly beneath it, dry. Rangers documented the immaculate placement before collecting it. Teams withdrew at 16:50 as fog thickened. The daily summary stated, nearly all carried items accounted for except final clothing layers. Spatial distribution shows progressive isolation of subjects' identity markers. Environmental anomalies correlate strongly with item emergence. No natural sequence models fit observed data. The operations chief added a handwritten note. Subject reduction nearly complete. Expect escalation. May 23rd began without rain, but every surface in the forest shone with a thin sheen of moisture. Dew clung to needles and branches in a uniform layer, more consistent than natural condensation. Rangers noted this without initially assigning significance, but the uniformity would appear again later in the day. At 0740, a revised grid was deployed. With nearly all of Morales' equipment recovered, search teams shifted focus to clothing layers. The operations chief stated plainly that if the pattern continued, the subject's remaining garments, or parts of them, would appear next. The remark was procedural, not speculative. By now, the logic of the incident was nearly predictable in its unpredictability. At 8:02, the first anomaly was logged: a localized lack of moisture. A patch of forest floor approximately 5 feet across was completely dry. Needle litter crisp, moss pale, soil loose, while the surrounding terrain was saturated. No indentation suggested an object had rested there. Moisture testing confirmed the dry patch had remained that way through the night. Rangers marked it and moved on. At 8:20, a ranger observed a faint shimmer, horizontal this time, like a thin sheet of glass reflecting light. It appeared between two trunks at chest height, held for nearly half a second, then dissolved without movement or sound. A second ranger saw it peripherally, but could not confirm orientation. The log categorized it as lateral refractive field. At 8:45, the day's first object emerged: Morales' uniform trousers. They were folded with precision and placed across a fallen limb. The fabric was impossibly clean. No dirt, no moisture, no fraying. The crease down each leg was sharp, as though ironed. Rangers examined the placement site. The limb bore no scrape marks, and debris beneath the trousers was undisturbed. Soil dampness indicated the item had not been present the night before. No tracks existed within a 15-foot radius. At 9:20, a ranger radioed in with a physiological anomaly: abrupt dizziness, followed by a moment of muffled hearing. The effect lasted less than 5 seconds. Another team member beside him felt nothing. Barometric sensors and environmental monitors showed stable conditions. The effect was logged as localized vestibular interference. At 9:50, a pattern in the underbrush drew Team C's attention. Several fern tips, only the tips, were curled inward in a full circle, as if heated. But no burn marks or discoloration appeared. Moisture on the fronds had evaporated uniformly in a 5-foot ring around the center. Rangers could not determine how the evaporation occurred without affecting the stems or soil. At 10:15, the day's second item appeared: Morales' final base layer garment. It hung from a thin snag on a redwood branch, suspended at a height of 7 feet. Clean, dry, edges aligned. Rangers used poles to retrieve it to avoid disturbing the site. Bark above and below showed no climbing marks. The branch supporting the item was too thin to bear weight. Soil directly beneath was pristine. No movement, no compression, no sign anything had stood there. At 10:50, a new acoustic anomaly occurred. A single tone, higher than the earlier low-frequency events, rang across Sector J. It lasted 3 seconds, wavering slightly. Rangers described it as a whistle without source, not mechanical, not human. Body cam recordings captured the tone clearly. It mapped to no known wildlife call and showed no harmonic signature consistent with equipment. At 11:20, drone operators ran a cross-slope scan. In the footage, a dark shape flashed between two trees, elongated, indistinct, lacking human proportions. When zoomed, the shape blurred as though it did not occupy consistent space. It appeared in only one frame. Technicians debated whether to classify it as artifact or anomaly. The log assigned it to the latter. At 11:50, Team D discovered a series of shallow indentations, 5 in total, arranged in a serpentine line. Each indentation was identical in size and spacing, as if stamped by the same object, but no tool mark was evident. Soil in each depression was dry at the base, damp at the edges. None overlapped. They ended abruptly at a small rise. At 12:20, the most troubling event of the morning occurred. A ranger's radio captured a burst of static resolving into a single, hoarse syllable. Not human, not mechanical, not recognizable. When the transmission replayed at the command post, several listeners reported feeling pressure behind the sound, though audio levels were normal. The voice, or whatever it was, never repeated. At 1300, the forest fell silent again, but this time only in a narrow 40-yard corridor. 2 teams inside the corridor experienced perfect stillness. Wind, birds, insects, while teams outside heard normal sound. The stillness lasted 35 seconds. Radios inside the corridor transmitted with a half-second delay, while the effect persisted, and immediately normalized afterward. At 13:30, the day's major item appeared: Morales' outer shell jacket, fully zipped, sleeves extended, laid perfectly centered on a flat stone, clean, unwrinkled, free of scent. Dew had formed on the surrounding stone surface, but not on the jacket itself. Beneath it, the stone was dry. Rangers noted this as consistent with earlier item patterns. At 14:10, a ranger reported a brief sensation of being watched. Immediate, intense, directionless. This was the first subjective psychological marker included in the incident log. The operations chief allowed its inclusion due to correlation with simultaneous telemetry jitter in multiple radios. At 14:45, a small bird was found dead near the day's first item site. No trauma, no predation, no rigor. Eyes open. The log recorded this neutrally, but the rangers were visibly disturbed. No wildlife deaths had been documented since the incident began. At 15:20, the final item of the day emerged: Morales' uniform shirt buttons, 5 of them, arranged in a perfect vertical line on a patch of bare soil. Each button cleaned, no scratches, no thread attached. Rangers confirmed the buttons matched the missing shirt, though the shirt itself had been intact when recovered. No natural explanation existed for the sequence reversal. Teams withdrew at 16:50 under tightening wind and scattered mist. The daily summary stated: clothing layer emergence nearly complete. Environmental anomalies and sensory irregularities increasing in complexity. Evidence suggests staged presentation of remaining subject attributes. The operations chief added, pattern approaching culmination. Prepare for final phase manifestations. May 24th began under an unmoving ceiling of cloud, flat, pewter gray, without breaks or texture. The forest was still. No wind moved through the canopy. Rangers noted in the morning log that sound carried unusually far, as if the air were denser. Radios tested nominal. At 07:30, teams deployed in staggered intervals to avoid clustering during potential anomalies. The operations chief instructed all units to treat the day as high-probability event time, though no one specified what such an event might entail. With nearly every item of Morales' gear recovered, anticipation shifted from item emergence to whatever the next phase might be. At 07:50, Team A identified the first anomaly: a thin vertical seam in the air, visible only because drifting mist bent around it. The seam appeared for 2 seconds between 2 redwood trunks, then closed soundlessly. A ranger placed a hand through the space afterward. Nothing resisted. Nothing emitted heat or cold. The incident log described it as momentary volumetric discontinuity. At 8:08, the day's first object surfaced. Morales' duty boots, insoles. They were placed side by side on a dry patch of soil. Clean. Unworn. The foam showed no compression pattern, nothing to indicate they had ever molded to a foot. Rangers checked the surrounding area. Not a twig was disturbed. Soil under each insole was dry, while soil immediately adjacent was damp. The contrast was consistent with earlier item placements. At 8:40, Team D felt a simultaneous pressure shift. Ears popping through elevation was constant. Each ranger reported a sudden thickening of air, lasting only a second. Radios crackled, but did not drop signal. Environmental sensors, positioned nearby, detected no pressure change. At 900, drone operators scanning the central ridge captured a brief flicker. A shadow form skimming across the ground, visible for less than a frame. It resembled previous anomalies. Elongated, low, lacking structure. The drone gyros showed no vibration at the moment of capture. The log again listed the event as optical displacement. At 9:35 came the second object, Morales' shoelaces. 4 laces, 2 pairs, laid in a perfect square on a moss bed. White, clean, free of moisture. Their tips pointed precisely to the cardinal directions. Moss beneath them was dry. Moss around them glistened with dew. Rangers noted the geometric regularity, but could not assign meaning. At 10:10, Team F reported hearing rapid ticks in the underbrush. 6 ticks, evenly spaced, but no visible source. They sounded metallic. A ranger approached the location and felt a brief vibration through the ground. Soil showed no disturbance. At 10:45, a new ground deformation pattern emerged. Several pine needles arranged in a spiral, tips pointing inward. The spiral radius measured 17 inches at its largest point. No prints, no broken needles. The formation had not existed during a sweep the previous afternoon. At 1100, the day's most significant item emerged, Morales' badge pin. It was embedded upright in the soil, pushed just deep enough to stand. The pinhead faced east. The metal gleamed, free of tarnish. Soil around the entry point was undisturbed. Rangers photographed the placement from multiple angles before extraction. The log noted, insertion without displacement inconsistent with physical force. At 11:30, Team C experienced a temperature drop of 5 degrees Celsius within a 10-foot radius. The cold lingered for nearly a minute, longer than earlier cold spots documented. Breath condensation was briefly visible. One ranger's skin temperature monitor dropped 3 degrees before normalizing. Equipment still recorded stable ambient readings just 6 feet outside the cold zone. At 12:05, a ranger reported a sudden perception of a figure standing behind him. When he turned, nothing was present. His teammate, 5 yards away, saw no movement. Bodycam video showed only normal forest conditions. The ranger described the sensation as fully formed, not imagined. This was the second subjective psychological marker accepted into the record. At 12:40, another item appeared. Morales' wristband from his hydration pack. It hung in mid-shrub height, looped neatly over a branch. Dry, clean, free of plant residue. The strap should have shown stress wear from field use, but did not. Rangers confirmed it matched the missing pack components recovered days prior. At 13:20, a new anomaly occurred across 2 teams simultaneously. A synchronized half-second radio blackout. All active channels went dead at the exact same timestamp, though signal monitors at the command post remained stable. The blackout ended abruptly, without static. At 1400, drone operators documented a spread of bowed ferns, 60 to 70 of them, forming a shallow corridor. Each fern bent at precisely the same angle. The corridor extended 40 feet before stopping abruptly. No animal trail matched the pattern. At 1440, The third major item of the day surfaced: Morales's belt buckle, separated from the belt, recovered earlier, positioned on a clean stone, polished, no scratches, no tarnish. The buckle interior groove, normally marked by leather wear, was pristine, as if never used. Rangers questioned how the buckle had detached without damage to the belt previously seen intact. At 15:15, a final sensory anomaly rippled through Sector G, a faint hum rising in frequency, lasting 4 seconds, then cutting to silence. The hum was not recorded on body cams, but 3 Rangers felt a vibration in the ribs, consistent with earlier low-frequency events. At 1600, teams reported subtle disorientation, mild difficulty estimating distance, inconsistent depth perception in the understory. No equipment malfunction correlated. The phenomenon lasted 10 minutes before easing. At 1645, operations suspended. Weather remained static. No wind. The daily summary stated, remaining subject identifiers continue to emerge in isolated, precise placements. Environmental anomalies intensify, but remain non-destructive. Pattern indicates proximity to culmination phase. The operations chief added a stark final line: "We are running out of things to find." May 25th began with a light ground fog that did not rise. It stayed low, drifting slowly through the understory like a thin uniform sheet. Rangers described it as directionless, not moving downslope or upslope, just shifting laterally in slow, nearly geometric waves. Visibility remained workable, but the air felt heavier than on previous mornings. Teams deployed at 0730 under a revised directive. Assume no object locations from prior days would remain stable. Several item sites had been revisited overnight with no changes, but the operations chief stated plainly that nothing in the incident pattern supported expected persistence. At 0755, the first anomaly occurred. Team E reported a flicker across their thermal scopes, not heat, but absence of it. A cold silhouette, human height but narrower, passed between 2 cedars at a speed inconsistent with walking or running. No footsteps, no corresponding motion in vegetation. The silhouette vanished when personnel approached. The log classified it as negative thermal traversal. At 0820, the day's first object was found. Morales's final garment, the inner waistband strip from his uniform trousers, a narrow band of fabric, still carrying a faint line of printed manufacturer text, laid in a perfect arc on a dry patch of soil. Clean, no fraying. The arc's curvature measured precisely 60 degrees. Soil beneath the band was uniformly dry. No prints surrounded it. This item marked the near-total removal of every wearable component except the subject himself. At 900, Team A paused after noticing a subtle but measurable drop in sound propagation. Voices dampened at distances under 15 feet. Radios transmitting with a hollow echo. No equipment fault was discovered. The phenomenon persisted for 4 minutes before normal sound returned. At 9:30, another anomaly appeared. A narrow linear clearing in the ferns, extending exactly 18 feet, width uniform at 8 inches. No broken stems, no crushed base, just ferns bent at a consistent angle, as though brushed aside by something with no mass. The line terminated abruptly at a moss-covered stone with no marks on it. At 10:10, the day's second object surfaced. Morales's last missing personal identifier, a small stitched tag from the inside of his pack. It lay balanced upright against a tree root, positioned so precisely that a breeze should have toppled it. Yet it did not fall. The tag was dry, clean, no soil embedded in the threads. Cameras captured no movement around the site. At 10:35, 4 Rangers in different positions simultaneously reported a sensation of tilting, as though the ground had shifted a degree beneath them. GPS stabilizers registered nothing. Levels placed on nearby logs showed perfect horizontal alignment. The effect ended in seconds. At 11:10, drone operators detected a new geometric formation on the forest floor. 6 small cleared circles arranged in a hexagonal pattern, each circle about a foot across. The formation was too precise for wildlife behavior, too clean for natural debris scouring, and arranged at near-perfect equidistance. When ground teams reached the location, ferns surrounding the circles were dry at the tips and damp at the bases, consistent with previous unknown drying events. At 11:40, a ranger described feeling a sudden shift in air pressure localized around his own body, like stepping from indoors to outdoors, but reversed. No other team member felt it. Bodycam audio captured a faint static rise during the moment of reported pressure shift. At 12:20, another item appeared. This one unexpected. Morales's personal notebook pen. It rested upright in the soil, tip downward, as though gently inserted. The pen carried no soil on its surface. The tip showed no bend. The orientation pointed directly northwest. The entry point had no displaced soil around it. Rangers retrieved it with tweezers to preserve whatever trace might be present. None was found. At 1300, Team F encountered a sustained acoustic anomaly, a modulated tone rising in frequency for 7 seconds, then dropping abruptly. Trees did not vibrate. Soil did not shift, but several rangers reported a resonance in the chest. The tone was recorded, but analysis later showed no harmonic structure, just a pure, unnatural sine rise. At 1335, a new phenomenon presented, a section of forest floor where dew evaporated in a widening ring, leaving dry soil at the center. The evacuation of moisture spread outward in a visible wave, slow, steady, silent, over 15 seconds. Rangers stood back, uncertain whether to approach. The ring stopped expanding at exactly a 3-meter diameter. At 14:10, the third major item of the day emerged, Morales's final uniform remnant, a fabric thread, barely 2 centimeters long, placed atop a perfectly dry leaf. Such a thread could not have been deliberately placed without disturbing the leaf, yet the leaf showed no movement marks. At 15:05, the forest fell into a deeper silence than any previous day. Absolute stillness. Even radio check chirps sounded muted, compressed. The stillness lasted 1 minute and 22 seconds. Rangers remained motionless. No one attempted movement inside the silence zone. At 15:45, Team B reported the day's final anomaly, a faint directional breeze, cold, steady, moving between 2 large redwoods, though foliage above and around remained perfectly still. The breeze persisted for 10 seconds, then vanished. No new items appeared after that. Teams withdrew at 16:50 under an unchanging sky. The daily summary read, "Nearly all physical identifiers of subject have been recovered. No biological evidence, no transitional patterns. Environmental anomalies increasing in spatial precision. Dimensional irregularities suspected." The operations chief's final line, "We have recovered everything but the man." May 26th began colder than any previous day. Not by temperature, ambient readings were normal, but by sensation. Rangers described the air as hollow, as though some frequency normally present in the environment had been removed. Even before deployment, several noted that voices carried strangely, as if muffled at the edges. Teams moved out at 07:30 under a strict instruction: report everything, no matter how minor. The operations chief added a final note before departure: "We are beyond evidence. We are now documenting conditions." At 07:50, Team D, moving through Sector N, reported the first anomaly, a subtle oscillation in light. Not flickering, more like brightness shifting 0.5%, darker, lighter, darker again, in a slow 2-second cycle. Only 2 rangers perceived it. The others saw nothing. Helmet cameras captured no change, yet audio picked up a faint rising hiss during each dimmer moment. At 8:05, the day's first object surfaced, though calling it an object overstated what it was. Rangers found a small clump of fibers, synthetic, blue-gray, consistent with the innermost lining of Morales's uniform trousers. The fibers were arranged in a near-perfect circle on a fallen log. Too perfect to be accidental, too small to be useful. Soil beneath the log showed no disturbance. Rangers collected the fibers with tweezers. No biological material was attached. At 8:30, Team A observed a new spatial anomaly. A row of 6 ferns bending inward toward a central point, as though pulled by a mild vacuum. No air movement detected. No sound. The inward bend persisted for 10 seconds before all 6 stems returned to their natural positions simultaneously, with no oscillation. At 900, the forest's ambient noise dropped suddenly, but only along a narrow 30-foot corridor. Insects, birds, wind, all silent within the boundary. Teams outside the corridor reported hearing normal sound from their own surroundings, but nothing from within the corridor, as if a barrier absorbed it. The silence lasted 41 seconds. At 9:30, a ranger scanning ahead reported seeing a crease in the air, like fabric folding slightly. The crease lasted less than a second. When he blinked, it was gone. Another ranger standing beside him saw nothing. The log recorded this as localized spatial shear, unconfirmed. At 10:10, the day's second item, or what remained of one, was documented. A zipper pull. Just the metal pull tab from Morales' duty jacket, placed at the exact center of a perfectly circular patch of dry ground. The pull tab was unblemished, reflective, almost polished. Soil beneath it was bone dry. Soil outside the circle was damp from the morning's condensation. Rangers measured the circle, 30 centimeters exactly. At 10:50, Team F encountered a new phenomenon. A rhythmic vibration through the ground, steady and slow, like a distant engine running at idle. The vibration persisted 12 seconds. No trees shook. No loose debris vibrated. The sensation was entirely internal, felt in the body, not observed in the environment. At 11:20, drone operators captured a frame showing what they described as a negative silhouette. The shape was roughly human-sized, but lacked detail, just an area of reduced luminance against the forest backdrop. It appeared only in a single frame, with no corresponding shadow or light source shift. The next frame was normal. At 11:50, a ranger within 50 yards of the drone anomaly site felt a sudden drop in body temperature, a wave of cold moving upward from the ground. Skin sensors recorded a 3-degree drop over 4 seconds before returning to baseline. Ambient air temperature did not change. At 12:20, the most formally troubling anomaly of the day occurred. 3 separate teams, in 3 separate sectors, reported hearing the same sound. 2 short clicks, a pause, then 2 more clicks. The timing between teams matched to within 1 second. The clicks were faint but distinct, not mechanical, not biological. Body cams from 3 rangers captured the pattern at slightly different volumes. Audio similarity analysis later found the sequences identical across all recordings. At 1300, another object, barely identifiable, appeared. A small rectangular piece of fabric, the interior tag from Morales' undershirt sleeve. It was pinned upright between 2 blades of grass. The blades were not bent. The tag stood without visible support. No thread anchored it. When removed, both blades of grass snapped upright instantly. At 1340, an extended silence event occurred. Entire teams reported total environmental muting. Wind, birds, equipment hum. Even footsteps sounded softened. The silence lasted 1 minute, 12 seconds. Radios transmitting within the silence zone produced only static, though command received normal carrier signals. Afterward, sound returned in disordered intervals. At 1410, the day's final item appeared, a single strand of Morales' hair. It rested across the surface of a dry leaf in the center of a small clearing. The leaf itself was crisp, dry, and undisturbed by dew. The hair was positioned perfectly straight along the leaf's spine. DNA testing later would confirm its origin, but at the moment of recovery, no disturbance suggested how it arrived there. At 15:20, as teams converged for withdrawal, a final anomaly swept briefly through the area. A low, resonant pulse, neither heard nor felt in the usual sense, more a moment of sudden awareness, like something large shifting position without making sound. Radios spiked with static for half a second. GPS units jittered, then stabilized. At 1600, operations suspended early. Light was failing faster than indicated by weather patterns. The forest had begun to feel deeper, as though distances inside it were changing. The summary for the day read, "Recovery now limited to micro-remnants. Subject decomposition not supported. Environmental anomalies increase in scale and coordination. Pattern indicates convergence." The operations chief ended with, "We are no longer tracking a missing person. We are tracking the absence he left behind." May 27th began under an overcast so dense it resembled a solid ceiling. Light reached the forest floor in a diffused, colorless wash, flattening depth perception and muting shadows. Several rangers commented that distances looked compressed, as if terrain features were slightly closer than they should be. GPS remained stable, but visual cues felt subtly altered. Teams moved out at 0730. The operations chief's briefing was short. Maintain spacing, maintain documentation, assume the pattern will escalate. No projections were made, no expectations stated. At 0755, the first anomaly occurred. A directional absence. A ranger scanning the slope ahead noticed a triangular area, nearly 10 feet tall, where the fog did not enter. The air inside the shape was clear, sharply edged, as though fog refused to occupy the space. The triangle persisted for 6 seconds, then filled naturally. No temperature or airflow difference registered on instruments. At 8:08, the first object of the day surfaced, though calling it an object was hardly accurate. A single uniform thread. It lay stretched across a thin stone ridge, perfectly straight, aligned to magnetic north. The thread was pale gray, synthetic, consistent with inner seams of a uniform shirt. No fraying, no moisture. Rangers collected it with tweezers. Beneath the stone, the soil was dry, as if the thread had acted as a barrier, a pattern consistent with prior micro-remnant finds. At 8:40, a ranger experienced a brief but intense auditory distortion. All ambient noise deepened by several octaves for 1 second, bird calls dropping to slow, unnatural tones before returning instantly to normal. Only one ranger heard the distortion. The others reported normal sound. No recording captured it. At 900, drone operators detected a geometric deformation, a circular ripple passing through the fog, expanding outward from a single point, like a stone tossed into water. The ripple expanded for 20 feet, then dissipated. No object was at the center. The drone's barometer registered a momentary pressure dip but returned to baseline immediately. At 9:20, Team C approached a shallow glade and documented a new pattern. Dozens of pine needles standing upright in the soil, positioned vertically like a miniature field of stakes. Each needle stood independently, no soil clumping at the base, no sign of manual insertion. The formation covered nearly 3 square feet, with spacing uniform to within millimeters. Rangers photographed the scene from all angles. No natural mechanism could account for orientation against gravity. At 9:50, the day's second object appeared, Morales' uniform collar stay, a thin plastic strip placed at the exact center of a dry leaf. The leaf's surface was crisp despite surrounding dampness. The stay's alignment was precise, parallel to the leaf's midrib. No mark suggested it had been dropped or brushed into place. Collection was careful. Nothing adherent was found on its surface. At 10:35, Team F reported a visual anomaly, a pale shape moving laterally through the trees at approximate shoulder height. Not human-sized, not animal-shaped, more like a shifting zone of brightness. The shape had no edges. Its motion was smooth, unbroken, and silent. It vanished behind a trunk and did not reappear. The log described it as luminous displacement. At 11:05, 3 rangers in different teams simultaneously reported a sensation of spatial misalignment, like taking a step on what should be flat ground and finding it slanted. GPS logs showed no elevation change. The sensation passed quickly. None experienced nausea or vertigo. At 11:30, a new acoustic event occurred. A subtle harmonic drone, multiple tones layered together, emerged from no discernible direction. Rangers froze, listening. The drone lasted 8 seconds. Audio recordings captured a faint waveform, but analysis later showed frequencies not matching environmental or mechanical sources. At 12:02, the day's third object surfaced, the smallest yet. A sliver of synthetic webbing, 3 millimeters long. It rested inside the curve of a curled fern frond, balanced impossibly on the inner edge. The frond had not been broken or disturbed. The sliver carried no dirt. Rangers noted that the fog rotation ended abruptly. At 13:15, Team A witnessed a temporary spatial distortion. A tall cedar appeared slightly narrower for a moment, visually squeezed, before returning to normal proportions. 2 rangers corroborated the observation. Cameras captured no distortion. At 13:50, another micro-item appeared. A tiny knot of thread, identical in color to previous uniform remnants. It rested atop a pine needle, balanced horizontally between 2 twigs. The needle had not sagged under its weight. The knot was perfectly centered along its length. At 14:25, the largest anomaly of the day manifested. A wide oval region, roughly 30 feet across, lost all ambient sound at once. Not silence, but absence, like an empty channel. When a ranger stepped into the region, his footsteps produced no sound at all, though he felt the impact normally. His breathing sounded muted inside his own skull. Video captured normal movement, but recorded no audio from within the zone. The effect lasted 54 seconds. At 15:10, the day's final object emerged. A single translucent filament, possibly from the stitching inside a uniform seam. It hung mid-air for a moment, visible against a backdrop of dark bark, before slowly drifting down and settling on a rock. Multiple rangers saw it. No breeze was present. No falling debris preceded or followed it. The filament was collected immediately. Teams withdrew at 16:50 under thickening gloom. The forest felt shallower and deeper at the same time. Clarity in some directions, distortion in others. The daily summary read, "Remnants now reduced to fibers and filaments. Environmental anomalies expanding into large-scale spatial distortions. No biological evidence. No trajectory. No transitional mechanisms." The operations chief added, in a noticeably unsteady hand, "Whatever removed the man has begun erasing the place around him." May 28th began darker than any morning since the start of the incident. Not because of cloud cover, though the sky was a uniform slab of gray, but because light itself seemed thinner. Rangers described it as shortened, as if illumination did not travel as far as usual. Every surface looked underexposed. No equipment detected abnormal light levels. Cameras auto-corrected seamlessly. Yet to the eye, the forest was dim. Teams deployed at 07:30 with strict spacing, greater than on any previous day. The operations chief's sole instruction before departure was, "Do not assume the ground is consistent." At 07:55, the first anomaly occurred. A sudden narrow band of warm air, no wider than a person's shoulders, passed between 2 rangers. The warmth lasted 1 second. No source, no wind. Thermometers registered nothing. The band dissipated as quickly as it appeared. At 8:02, the day's first object appeared. A tiny fragment of synthetic stitching, blue-gray, less than a millimeter long. It was discovered resting on the tip of a broken twig at chest height, balanced so precisely that its position defied natural deposition. There was no fiber snag on the twig. The fragment appeared placed, not caught. Soil beneath was undisturbed. This fragment confirmed what had been suspected. The incident's item phase was nearly at molecular scale. At 8:30, a ranger several meters from Team C reported hearing a voice behind him, a single clear syllable. He turned. No one stood within 40 feet. His teammate, closer to him than the source he indicated, heard nothing. Bodycam audio captured only a faint rise in ambient hiss at the moment of perception. The event was logged as unilateral vocal anomaly. At 900, a drone scanning the lower ridge recorded a horizontal distortion, a band of air bending the trees behind it. The distortion moved slowly for 3 seconds, then vanished. No corresponding sound or temperature shift. Playback showed the band stretching and compressing the background visually, like a transparent wave. At 9:25, rangers moving through Sector K discovered a new environmental feature, a shallow trench, only an inch deep, carved in a near-perfect arc across the forest floor. The arc extended 21 feet, radius consistent throughout. Soil displaced from the trench had not scattered. It was absent altogether. No digging marks, no animal tracks, no tool impressions. The arc had not been present during prior sweeps. At 1000, another object surfaced, a clear, nearly invisible filament. It hung suspended in mid-air, horizontal, as if drawn between 2 points, though no branches or structures aligned to hold it. The filament vibrated slightly, though there was no breeze. When a ranger approached, the filament dropped vertically and settled on the ground. It was retrieved with tweezers. No tension or anchoring marks were found. At 1050, a new sensory anomaly appeared. For several seconds, 3 rangers experienced the unmistakable sensation of a distant footfall. Heavy, slow, far below the ground, like something stepping miles beneath them. There was no vibration in the soil, no acoustic signature, yet the sensation was identical for all 3. The log described it only as perceived subsurface mass displacement. At 11:15, Team F documented a patch of ferns arranged with mathematical regularity. Each frond bent at exactly the same angle toward a central point, not crushed or broken, but gently bowed. The arrangement formed a radial pattern resembling a compass rose, though with more spokes than cardinal directions. When photographed from above, the symmetry was unmistakable. At 11:40, a ranger saw something move between trees, a tall, pale distortion, slow, deliberate, with a vertical orientation unlike earlier low-shape anomalies. It passed behind a cedar and did not re-emerge. No sound, no tracks. The ranger did not describe it as humanoid, only as upright. The log classified this as vertical displacement event. At 12:10, the day's third object appeared, a minuscule metal shaving. It rested on a piece of bark, reflecting faint light. Rangers later confirmed it matched the alloy used in Morales' belt buckle, already recovered intact days before. The shaving's existence raised questions. No damage to the buckle, no other cut metal on the subject, no known source for such a fragment. At 12:50, ambient sound collapsed across a 100-yard radius. Not silence. Sound collapse. Every noise flattened into the same dull, low-frequency hum. Footsteps, speech, birds, branches, all rendered into a uniform, droning tone. It lasted 14 seconds. Recordings captured the hum but could not isolate its source. When the collapse ended, normal sound returned abruptly. At 13:30, a spatial anomaly occurred. A section of forest floor, roughly 10 feet long, appeared to tilt visually, though terrain remained level. The tilt illusion persisted for 15 seconds. Several rangers felt themselves leaning to compensate, though inclinometers showed no change. 2 rangers experienced brief nausea. At 1400, another micro-remnant appeared. A narrow filament looped into a near-perfect circle, placed atop a pebble. The loop maintained its shape even when lifted, suggesting it had been fixed in place somehow. Yet no adhesive or residue was found. At 1520, the forest dimmed suddenly, light retracting, depth shortening. before returning to baseline within seconds. Several rangers gasped involuntarily, describing the dimming as a brief encroachment. At 1600, as teams prepared to withdraw, a final anomaly emerged. A low, oscillating tone, pulsing in 5-second intervals. The tone was not heard, but felt. Pressure against the sternum, subtle but undeniable. GPS units jittered. Radios crackled. The tone stopped abruptly at 17 seconds. Teams withdrew under explicit order. The summary for the day read, "Remnants at submaterial scale emerging. Spatial distortions expanding into multiple axes. Ambient environment exhibiting compression and collapse behaviors. Incident approaching terminal phase." The operations chief ended with, "We are nearing whatever remains in the center of this." May 29th began without dawn. Light rose, but not in gradations. Instead, the forest shifted from darkness to a muted gray all at once, as if someone had lifted the dimmer on the world in a single motion. Rangers noted the absence of the usual transition. The world simply became lit, without a beginning. Radios registered a faint static surge at the exact moment of the shift. Teams deployed at 0730 under conditions described as non-photometric normal. No weather explanation existed for the uniform grayness. Instruments measured normal daylight, but the eye disagreed. The operations chief instructed teams to stay within line of sight and to document shadows carefully. At 0755, the first anomaly appeared. A complete absence of shadow in a 20-foot clearing. Objects cast, no darkness. Trees, rocks, packs. Everything sat in flat, directionless light. When a ranger stepped into the clearing, his shadow vanished instantly, returning the moment he stepped out. Cameras showed normal shadows, contradicting the ranger's perception. The log marked this as biphasic perceptual shadow divergence. At 8:06, the day's first object emerged, a nearly invisible wisp of synthetic thread. It floated downward as teams watched, descending slowly through stagnant air. No breeze carried it. Its fall was steady, vertical, like a controlled release. It landed on the back of a ranger's glove. The thread was consistent with the interior stitching of Morales's field uniform. No soil, no oils, no sign of wear. Rangers traced its path upward, nothing above. At 8:30, a ranger noted that the forest ahead seemed subtly closer than it should be. Trees appeared compressed inward, as if depth had decreased. Two other rangers simultaneously reported the opposite, trees receding farther away. Cameras captured consistent geometry, but perception diverged. The log described it as localized depth disagreement. At 900, drone operators documented the largest spatial deformation to date. A ripple passing downward through the air, from canopy to forest floor, bending branches and trunks in a uniform wave. Not wind, not pressure. The ripple moved as if gravity had briefly shifted orientation. After 4 seconds, the forest returned to normal. No animals reacted. No birds scattered. At 9:25, the day's second item surfaced, a small polymer shard. It rested upright at the center of a dry patch of moss. No moisture, no surrounding disturbance. Rangers identified it as part of the internal structure of Morales's GPS unit. Yet that device had been recovered intact days earlier. The shard showed no fracture marks, as if it had never been part of anything assembled. At 1000, the first large-scale auditory anomaly occurred. Sound didn't stop. It inverted. Every distant noise, branches creaking, insects, wind, grew louder. Every close noise, footsteps, breath, fabric rustle, grew quieter. Rangers could hear distant features with clarity, but struggled to hear their own movement. The effect lasted 23 seconds. Recordings captured none of it. Audio tracks remained normal. At 10:40, a ranger described seeing a figure, thin, vertical, pale, standing between two firs. The figure did not move. It did not shift. It simply was for exactly 1 second, then gone. Vegetation behind it remained undisturbed. The ranger insisted it was not a person, and not a wildlife silhouette. The log recorded the description verbatim without interpretation. At 11:15, a remarkable event occurred. The forest floor shifted visually into a grid-like pattern, faint but geometric. Pine needles aligned perfectly in rows. Moss patches squared themselves. Fallen branches straightened into parallel lines. The grid extended across a 30-foot radius. When rangers stepped into it, the pattern dissolved instantly beneath their boots, then reformed behind them. At 11:50, another micro-remnant appeared. A narrow band of elastic from inside a uniform cuff. It had been wedged upright in the bark of a standing tree. No insertion mark. No residue. The elastic piece stood at a perfect 90-degree angle to the bark grain. The tree had not been damaged. Even the outermost fibers of bark were intact. Rangers noted the impossibility of placing such a thin remnant without disturbing the bark surface. At 12:20, a sudden loss of vertical orientation swept across Sector J. Rangers remained upright, but reported a sensation of leaning, as though gravity had rotated a few degrees sideways. Compass bearings jittered. Water in canteens stayed level. The effect lasted 9 seconds. At 1300, drone footage captured an impossible feature. A patch of forest that appeared to be duplicated. Same arrangement of logs, same fallen branches, same ferns, repeated 20 feet to the east. When ground teams arrived, the duplication was gone, but the drone footage remained clear. 2 identical patches of terrain, offset. At 1340, the day's third object surfaced, a synthetic fragment less than a millimeter thick, matching Morales' uniform sleeve lining. It was found standing vertically, balanced on the sharp tip of a pine needle. The needle had not bent. The fragment wavered in place as if supported by a field, not by weight. Rangers collected it carefully. The pine needle remained perfectly vertical afterward. At 1410, a massive silence event swept across the entire operational grid. Not the collapses from previous days. Something deeper. A total absence, like an unfilled void dropped over the forest. Radios transmitted blank space. Recorders captured nothing. Rangers heard their own heartbeats. Even that felt muted. The silence lasted exactly 1 minute. At 15:02, a ranger glimpsed the clearest anomaly to date. A tall, narrow distortion moving laterally between trees. Slightly reflective. Human height. Upright. No limbs. No outline. It moved smoothly, like a pane of glass sliding sideways. It vanished behind a cedar and didn't reappear. At 15:55, the forest light dimmed again, but this time, the dimming remained. It did not lift. It did not correct. It held, suspended at a level just shy of natural daylight. Teams withdrew at 16:30 under order. Visibility was collapsing, though instruments insisted otherwise. The summary for the day read, "Spatial, acoustic, and perceptual anomalies now operating at environmental scale. Micro-remnants continue to appear. No biological evidence. Incident approaching singularity behavior." The operations chief wrote only, "Tomorrow will not be like the others." May 30th did not begin. Light did not rise. Shadows did not shift. The forest simply existed in a fixed, muted gray, unchanged from the moment teams had withdrawn the night before. Several rangers arriving at staging reported a sensation of having slept without dreaming. One said he felt as though he hadn't been away at all, as if the night had not occurred. Radios powered on normally but produced a faint, steady hiss across all channels, like background pressure. At 07:30, the operations chief authorized what was termed a terminal sweep, a coordinated, full-span grid intended not to find Morales, nor further items, but to document whatever remained of the phenomenon's footprint. The forest felt shallow and deep at once, an impossible dual sensation that made estimation of distance unreliable. Teams entered the search area at 0750. At 0751, the first anomaly surfaced. The fog, which had been still, rose upward in a smooth column, as though drawn by a vacuum far above the canopy. The column maintained its shape for 8 seconds, forming a perfect cylinder. Then it collapsed instantly, leaving clear air behind. No moisture fallout occurred. At 0803, the day's first object appeared, and it was not a remnant of fabric, nor thread, nor fiber. It was nothing. A circular area 5 inches across contained no material at all. Not soil, not air, not void in the visual sense, just an absence of substance. Rangers described it as a hole in being, a point where the forest floor simply skipped. The edges of the circle were sharp. Pine needles around it bent inward toward the gap, as if gravity were altered. When probed with a stick, there was no resistance, but the stick did not pass through. It simply failed to enter, as if slipping off existence itself. The anomaly persisted for 11 seconds before winking out of detection entirely. At 8:30, a low harmonic began resonating across Sector G. Not heard, felt. The vibration passed through Rangers' chests like a trembling pressure. Birds took flight from a mile-wide area in a synchronized burst, the first wildlife movement seen in days. The harmonic rose in intensity, plateaued, then ended suddenly without decay, cut off mid-resonance. At 900, drone operators documented a stunning geometric transformation. A triangular distortion cutting through the forest canopy, descending slowly, like a fold in invisible fabric. The trees beneath it warped inward, as though seen through a lens. When the shape touched the ground, vegetation beneath it straightened unnaturally, aligning in a perfect grid. The distortion receded upward and vanished. At 9:25, the last physical item appeared, a single fingerprint, not on an object, on the air itself. A faint, translucent ridge pattern suspended at eye level, rotating slowly as though cast onto a surface that wasn't there. Moran, the ranger who first saw it, described the print as unmistakably human, but not necessarily Morales's. It faded as he approached, dissolving into particulate sparkles that did not fall, simply unreached by gravity. No photograph captured it. At 9:50, the forest changed orientation. Not physically. Compasses remained steady, but perceptually. Rangers reported that the entire environment shifted sideways as though the world tilted, except no one lost balance. Trees appeared subtly skewed. Paths appeared 10 degrees off their memory. For 30 seconds, every ranger in the grid experienced the same dislocation. At 10:10, the central event occurred. The silence returned, but this was not an absence of sound. It was an inversion. Rangers described it as hearing the forest from the outside, as though all sound happened at a distance unreachable by the ear. Within the inversion, 3 things happened simultaneously. 1. A ripple passed through the air, bending tree trunks subtly before releasing them. 2. A vertical seam, the height of a person, opened between 2 cedars, invisible except for the way mist parted around it. 3. A single, low, resonant syllable emerged, not from radios, not from space, but from the fabric of the forest itself. A syllable that several rangers described later as a name. None could agree on which name. The seam closed in under half a second. The ripple dissipated. The inversion lifted. At 11:30, after canvassing the area, teams found the ground where Morales's last known GPS coordinate had been recorded 9 days earlier. The soil was untouched. No footprints, no fibers, no sign of disturbance. But in a shallow depression between 2 roots, they detected a soft warmth, brief fading, like the last lingering remnant of something that had once occupied space. Thermal cameras recorded a faint humanoid outline in the soil's heat signature, a residual phantom lasting 5 seconds before blending into the ambient temperature. At 1300, the forest light shifted back to normal. Not gradually, instantly. Shadows returned, depth reasserted, sound dispersed naturally, and the forest became a forest again. No more items emerged. No more anomalies occurred. The incident ended without resolution, only cessation. Teams withdrew at 14:10 under clear skies. The final daily summary stated, "Convergence completed. No further anomalies detected." Subject remains unlocated. Environmental parameters normalized. Incident formally unresolved. In the operations chief's own hand, on the final line of the final report, we did not find the subject. We found the outline of where he stopped existing.